My name is Silas Vance. I am 51 years old, and for the last 15 years I have carried the badge of a law enforcement ranger for Death Valley National Park. My beat covers the jagged, sun-scorched borderlands of California and Nevada, a place where the earth itself seems to resent human presence. Before we get into the heart of this mystery, do me a favor. Stop what you're doing and let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. Out here in the silence of the dunes, knowing there's an audience on the other side makes the job feel a little less isolated. I've been with the National Park Service for a total of 27 years. I've seen the lush forests of the Northwest and the rolling plains of the Heartland, but nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to the raw, visceral hostility of Death Valley. This is the hottest, driest, and most unforgiving patch of territory in North America. During the peak of summer, the mercury doesn't just climb, it screams, regularly exceeding 120 Vera Fahrenheit. This park is home to Badwater Basin, the lowest point on the entire continent, sitting at a staggering 2,082 feet below sea level. It is a literal pressure cooker. For human survival, this is one of the most hostile environments on the face of the planet. My daily grind involves patrolling over 3 million acres of jagged mountains and shifting desert sands. My responsibilities range from standard emergency response to the grim task of dealing with fatalities. Unfortunately, I deal with death more often than I'd like, mainly because people fundamentally underestimate how quickly this place can kill you. The event that changed everything for me happened last July. We were in the middle of a brutal heat wave, the kind where the air feels like a physical weight against your chest. Daytime temperatures were hitting a lethal 28 degrees. I was out on night patrol around 10,000 p.m., winding my way through some of the most remote backcountry areas of the park. These are the places where people sometimes try to camp illegally, thinking they can dodge the heat or the fees by hiding in the shadows of the canyons. Even at night, the cool air was still a sweltering 100 degrees. I was navigating a narrow, washboard road near the Panamint Range when my spotlights caught the glint of glass and metal. It was a white sedan, a common rental model with Nevada plates, parked haphazardly off the shoulder of the road. I pulled my rig to a stop, the dust from my tires swirling into the cabin. I stepped out, the heat hitting me like an open oven door. The car was empty. Worse, it was unlocked, and the keys were still dangling in the ignition. The engine was dead, and the battery had been drained flat because the doors had been left wide open for hours. When I looked inside, my stomach did a slow roll. This wasn't just a breakdown. There was luggage in the back seat, half-full water bottles sweating on the floor mats, and a wallet and smartphone sitting right there on the dashboard in plain sight. In the desert, your phone and your water are your lifelines. You don't leave them behind unless you are in extreme distress or moving in a blind, irrational panic. I opened the wallet and pulled out a driver's license. David Miller, 42 years old, out of Phoenix. A guy from Arizona should have known the rules of the desert. I called the plates into dispatch. They confirmed the car was a rental picked up 3 days earlier in Las Vegas. I began a systematic search of the immediate perimeter. I used my high-powered spotlight to cut through the oppressive darkness, screaming David's name until my throat was raw. No answer. Only the wind, whistling through the creosote bushes. About a quarter mile from the vehicle, I found the first clue, footprints. A single set of tracks made by tennis shoes heading northeast. He wasn't following the road toward help. He was walking straight into the increasingly rough and jagged terrain of the desert. I tracked those prints as far as I could, but eventually, the soft sand gave way to volcanic rock and hard-packed salt. The trail went cold. I marked my GP's coordinates and called for every resource we had. For the next 3 days, we launched a full-scale search operation. We had helicopters with thermal imaging, ground teams on foot and horseback, and specialized tracking dogs. We scoured every inch of that sector. We found nothing, no body, no clothing, no additional tracks. In 28-degree heat, a man without water survives for maybe 6 hours, a day at the absolute maximum. We should have found his body within a 2-mile radius of that car, but David Miller had simply ceased to exist. What truly disturbed me, however, was the pattern I uncovered later. I started pulling old park records, and what I found chilled me more than the desert night. Death Valley has an unnaturally high number of these abandoned vehicle cases. Over the last 20 years, we've had at least 15 documented instances where someone left a perfectly functional car with all their possessions, wallets, phones, water, and walked into the desert to vanish forever. The official reports always say the same thing. Death due to exposure remains unrecovered, but 15 people in 20 years, all following the exact same bizarre ritual. That's not a coincidence, that's a statistic. I started talking to the veteran rangers, the guys who have lived and breathed Death Valley for 30 or 40 years. One old-timer told me something he never dared put in an official report. He said that on night patrols in the most remote basins, he'd see lights, not flashlights or car lights, but floating orbs of light moving through areas where no roads exist. Lights that would simply blink out of existence the moment you tried to approach them. He'd find tire tracks in canyons that were physically impossible to reach by any vehicle. And he spoke of a sensation, a heavy, crushing feeling of being watched by something unseen while you're miles away from the nearest human being. He told me about a case from 1995 that still haunts the department. A family of 4 two-parents and 2 young children abandoned their car near Badwater Basin. We launched a massive 2-week search. We covered every square foot of that desert multiple times over. We found nothing, no remains, no scraps of clothing, not even a footprint from the kids aged 7 and 9. They were just gone. The Western Shoshone people, who have called this desert home for thousands of years, have their own explanations. They warn about places of power where the boundary between our world and something else becomes dangerously thin. They describe a calling, a force or an entity that can grip a person's mind, compelling them to walk away from safety and into the lethal heart of the wasteland. I continue to work here because the job matters. But I am different now. I know the patterns. I know the zones where people tend to disappear. And when I'm on night patrol now, and I get that prickly sensation on the back of my neck, or I see a light dancing in the distance where no light should be, I don't go looking for answers anymore. I've learned that Death Valley isn't just hostile because of the heat. There is something else out here, something that draws people in, makes them leave their lives behind, and walk into the dark. And whatever it is, it's been here a lot longer than we have. Part 2. The Echoes of the Coyote District. My name is Julian Castro. I'm 63 years old, and I'm a weekend prospector. Ever since I retired from the Marine Corps, I've spent my free time hunting for gold and minerals in the forgotten corners of the Mojave Desert. It's been my passion for 38 years. This particular incident happened last October in a place I'll call the Viper District. I won't give you the real name because some places are better left undisturbed. It's an old mining area from the 1890s gold rush, buried deep in the Mojave about 40 miles from the nearest paved road. Back in its heyday, the district had about 20 active mines, but by 1910, the gold was gone and the people followed. I had done my homework research, the geology, got the permits, and packed my truck with enough gear for a 3-day expedition. I arrived on a Friday afternoon and set up my base camp near the mouth of one of the old, boarded-up shafts. The isolation was total. No cell signal, no radio chatter, and not another soul for 50 miles in any direction. Just the way I like it. I spent Friday afternoon hiking the ridges and scanning the old waste rock piles with my metal detector. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, I headed back to my tent. That night, around 9:30 p.m., I was lying on my cot, reading a book by the light of my headlamp, when I heard the unmistakable sound of engines. Not just one, but multiple vehicles, their tires crunching over the heavy gravel. They were getting closer. I unzipped my tent, feeling a surge of annoyance. I wasn't expecting company. I looked out and saw headlights, 4 or 5 sets of them, weaving up the rough trail toward my position. The vehicles, a mix of heavy-duty trucks and subs, pulled up about 100 yards from my camp. The engines cut off, doors slammed, and I started hearing voices. It sounded like a crowd, at least 8 or 10 people. They were talking, laughing, and then music started. It sounded like a party. High energy, loud music echoing off the canyon walls. I was uneasy, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a group of off-roaders or some kids out for a desert bonfire. I stayed in my tent, kept my lights off, and just listened. The party went on for exactly 1 hour. It was a cacophony of laughter and bass, and then, without any warning, it stopped. There was no winding down. No one said goodbye. No engine started. It was just instant, total silence, like a film reel had snapped. I waited 10 minutes, my heart thumping against my ribs, then I peeked out again. The dark shapes of the vehicles were still there, sitting motionless in the moonlight. No flashlights, no embers from a fire, no whispering, just a dead, heavy silence. I finally fell into an uneasy sleep. When the sun broke over the ridges at dawn, I immediately scrambled out of my tent to see who my neighbors were. The desert was empty. There were no trucks, no subs. I walked over to the exact spot where I had seen them parked. The ground was completely undisturbed. There were no fresh tire tracks in the soft silt, no footprints, no crushed vegetation, no cigarette butts or beer cans. It was as if the last century had never been touched. I spent the rest of Saturday in a state of high alert. I didn't do any prospecting. I just sat by my truck with my sidearm, debating whether I should just pack up and leave. But I convinced myself that the desert played tricks on the mind. I stayed for one more night. That night, at exactly 9:00 p.m., the recording started again. The engines rumbling in the distance, the headlights cutting through the dark, the vehicles parking in the same exact spots. I watched from the shadows of my tent, wide awake and stone-cold sober. I could see the glint of the moonlight on the windshields. I could hear the same woman's laughter. This was real. It was physical. I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I grabbed my high-powered tactical flashlight and started walking toward them. I wanted to see their faces. I wanted to know what kind of game they were playing. As I got within 50 yards, I raised my light and clicked it on. The moment the beam hit the space where the truck should have been, everything vanished. The lights, the music, the people, gone in a microsecond. I was standing in the middle of a silent, empty wash. I walked all the way to the parking spot, swinging my light in every direction. Nothing but dust and creosote. I didn't wait for morning. I threw my gear into my truck, not even bothering to fold the tent properly, and I drove out of there. Navigating that mountain road at night was dangerous, but I didn't care. I needed to be away from that place. Later, I dug into the local archives. The Viper District wasn't just a failed mining camp, it was a site of extreme violence. In the 1890s, there were multiple murders over claim disputes. There was a documented massacre where a group of miners was wiped out in a night of drunken rage. The TRUE Mojave people have a deep understanding of these stained lands. They believe that places where blood has been spilled violently can trap the spirits in the events of that time. They describe it as a haunted loop, an echo of the past that plays back under certain atmospheric conditions. They warn that the boundary between the living and the dead is dangerously weak in these canyons, and if you stay too long, you might lose your grip on what is real. I've been prospecting for 38 years, and I've seen some strange things, but I will never go back to the Viper District, because I've learned that some places in the Mojave aren't actually abandoned. They are still occupied by the shadows of the people who died there, replaying their final hours forever. Part 3, The Ghost Jeep of the Mojave Road. My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm 44 years old, and my life revolves around overlanding long distance, off-road expeditions into the most remote corners of the American Southwest. I drive a heavily modified 4x4 rig, built to be a self-contained survival capsule. Last March, I set out to run the Mojave Road. It's a 1,388-mile historic trail that stretches from the Colorado River all the way to Barstow, California. It's an old trail once used by Native American traders and later as a military supply route for the U.S. Army. It's a place where you are truly on your own. If your engine dies or you blow a tire in the wrong spot, you are in a life-threatening situation. I was traveling solo, which I've done dozens of times. By the afternoon of my second day, I had reached the most isolated stretch of the trail, the section between Soda Lake and Afton Canyon. This is a place where you can drive for 8 hours and never see another human being or a bar of cell service. Around 4:00 p.m., I rounded a sharp bend in the trail and slammed on my brakes. There, sitting dead center in the middle of the narrow track, was another vehicle. It was an older Jeep, a Chief 5 from the 1970s, painted a dull desert tan. It was absolutely coated in a thick, crusty layer of dust. I sat there for a minute, waiting to see if a driver would step out. Nothing moved. I hopped out of my truck and walked toward the Jeep, calling out to see if anyone was injured or needed a tow. As I got closer, a cold chill ran down my spine, despite the desert heat. The Jeep looked wrong. The paint wasn't just faded, it was scorched and peeling in a way that only happens after decades of exposure to the elements. The tires were flat and the rubber was cracked like old parchment. I reached the driver's side and looked in. The door was hanging open on its hinges. The entire interior was filled with drifted sand. On the seats were old, rusted tools and sun-bleached water cans. It looked like a time capsule from another era. On the dashboard sat an old paper map, so brittle it looked like it would crumble if I touched it. And then I saw it, a leather-bound notebook sitting on the passenger seat. I picked it up carefully. It was a journal. I flipped to the last page. The entry was dated May 17, 1981. The writer, a man named Lt. Colonel Elias Vance, described how his Jeep had suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure. He wrote that he was out of water and was going to attempt to walk toward the mountains to find a spring. That was the end of the book. I stood there, my brain trying to process the impossibility of what I was seeing. This Jeep had been here since 1981. I had driven this exact trail 3 years ago, and I knew for a fact that this section of the road was clear. A vehicle doesn't just appear in the middle of a historic trail 40 years after it was lost. I tried to push the Jeep off the trail so I could pass, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like it was anchored into the bedrock. I had to risk a dangerous bypass through the soft sand dunes just to get around it. Once I was clear, I stopped and looked back. The Jeep was still there, a lonely tan speck in the vast brown wilderness. The next day, when I finally hit a town and got a signal, I started searching for the name Elias Vance. The results made my blood run cold. Elte. Colonel Elias Vance had indeed disappeared on the Mojave Road in May of 1981. His Jeep was found a week later by a search party. Vance's body was recovered 2 miles away. He had died of dehydration. But here's the part I can't explain. According to the official police and military records, the Jeep was towed out of the desert and sold for scrap in 1982. The vehicle I had touched, the journal I had read, they had been destroyed 44 years ago. I shared my story on an overlanding forum, expecting to be mocked. Instead, I found a community of people who had seen the exact same thing. Other travelers reported a tan Jeep blocking the road, only for it to be gone when they returned with help. Some reported seeing entire military convoys from the 1940s, ghost convoys, moving silently across the dry lake beds. The Mojave and Keem elders tell us that the desert is a living memory. They say that when a traveler dies a lonely, desperate death, their final journey is imprinted on the land. Under the right conditions, the desert replays that tragedy for the living. It's a warning, a reminder of how fragile we are. I still go overlanding, it's what I love. But I've learned that on the old trails, you're never truly alone. The past is always there, just out of sight, waiting for the wind to shift so it can show itself again. And if you see a tan Jeep blocking your path, don't stop, just keep driving.